I'm now going to run through the panels on the right hand side of the interface. We've got the basic panel, the tone curve, HSL, split toning, detail. You'd normally approach these in the order that they're given, but some of the later additions to Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw include camera calibration, transform and lens correction, so you may wish to address those ones before we start on the basic, but I'm going to go to the basic panel for a start. I'm just going to get rid of the film strip so we've got a little bit more space to play with there. And again, right clicking here, solo mode, make sure that whenever we click a panel, the rest of the panels collapse just to show the panel that we're interested in. And it's especially useful if you're using a smaller monitor like I am at the present. So here we have it with a different image, just so that we can show some of the show off better the controls in the basic panel. We can also maybe just collapse that side as well, so we've got a larger image that we're working on. So the first thing is probably just to make sure that the image is straight. We can see we've got a horizon there, so let's just go to the crop overlay, which has got the angle tool there. So if I click on the angle tool, we can click and drag along the horizon just to give us a straighten the image so that it doesn't look like the sea is rolling out of the image. Now I'm going to select done on that one. The next thing is probably to do the color temperature, and at the moment it's as shot and it looks okay, and we've got some alternates here. We've got auto, so this is how Lightroom believes the colors need to be rendered. We've got a fixed daylight rendering, and these are in degrees Kelvin. You can see here 5,500 degrees Kelvin. That's what Lightroom or Adobe believe the color temperature needs to be for normal daylight, and that looks okay. Cloudy, that usually gives you a cooler sort of effect, so the temperature has gone up to 6,500. Shade, okay, so we have these fixed settings we could apply if they're applicable to the type of image that we're looking at. I'm going to go back to as shot. We've also got the white balance selector tool. Select that, and if we can find an area that we believe should be a neutral grey. Now the clouds may sometimes work, especially if you can find an area that isn't very bright, but because they're in the distance it may not quite work as you expect, because the foreground detail might not be the same kind of color as what we've got in the distance. But I think that's not too bad there. Could try over here. Okay, if you have auto dismiss selected, then when you select, your tool disappears. Okay, so you've got to go back to it, click, tool disappears, go back to it. Okay, so if you have get rid of that auto dismiss, it means that you can just click. Maybe we've got some grey rock there, well that probably contains a little bit more orange, and so it's given the image a more, maybe not quite the right color. So I'll stick with the clouds. I don't think that's too bad. You can always just, of course, just drag the sliders as you wish, and we can change the tint as you wish. Okay, or we can just decide we want as shot. Okay, so you can change it as many times as you wish. We can change the size of that cursor or the grid so it includes more pixels from the selected area by dragging our scale there. Okay, so that's a smaller pixel area that it's selecting to give us our treatment. I'm going to put that back in there. We can now work through the sliders down here. So we've got exposure. Actually, it doesn't look too bad. Looking at our histogram, look. So we don't appear to have any black clipping here, and we can either select our black clipping the shadow clipping warning. By that selected, you can actually see we've got some blue appearing here. Let's just click the white one. That would be rendered as red. So if we just drag the red slider, the white slider, you can see that that's showing as red there. I'll double click that to bring it back. So there is a little bit of shadow detail clipping, but I'm going to get rid of those because I prefer to use the Alt key when I'm assessing clipping. So I might just drag the exposure just up a little bit. Now that alters the central area, this peak in the middle here, and it drags the whole histogram either right or left. And you can see the effect of it. Drag it to the right, drag it to the left, and it does it in a way that tries not to induce clipping. Even though I've gone and dragged it right over to the right, there's still no clipping there. So it's squashed it all up without clipping. And if I drag it to the left, it's squashed it all up without clipping much the blacks. So it's quite an intelligent way of changing the exposure. If we want to bring back more detail into the bright areas, the highlights, we can drag the highlight slider to the left. You can see, so it brings more detail into them, or if you drag it to the right, it kind of expands the highlight information. So normally I would be dragging that to the left a little bit to bring more detail into the highlights. We can do a similar sort of thing for the shadow area, but this time of course we do it the other way. If you drag it to the left, you're blocking out the shadows, you're making them darker. But dragging it to the right, we can bring back more detail into the shadows. Okay? But by doing this, we're tending to flatten the image a little bit. I will address the whites and the black sliders after I've done the rest of the sliders. Clarity. This introduces either negative or positive, and of course all these sliders are negative or positive depending on which way you drag them. But clarity tends to emphasize contrast in the midtones, so it's almost like a mid-tone sharpening effect. And for an image like this, an enhancement of about 20, 21, something like that, often makes a nice impression. Saturation, that increases the color or decreases the color. Irrespective of the amount of color already there, it will just boost it and often just send it to clipping. It'll clip the whichever color we're looking at. But you can see that the blues, probably the oranges, they're all clipped by doing that. Vibrance, just double click that. Vibrance tends to increase or decrease, but it's looking at the amount of color information already in the pixels. So if it's already got a lot of color in it, it tends to reduce its effect. And any pixels that have got less color in them, it tends to apply the effect to. So it can, I use the vibrance rather than the saturation. In fact, sometimes I'll drag the saturation down a bit and then just boost additionally the clarity, and this gives you a slightly better blend of colors across the image. I'll then go back to the whites once I've adjusted them. I may have adjusted the tone curve as well, and one or two other things. So you can always come back to the basic panel, and we can adjust the white slider and the black slider, which adjust the ends of the histogram. You can see here we haven't quite got detail in the very bright areas, so we're lacking a little bit of contrast really. So I'm going to press the Alt key, drag the white slider to the right, and we're just starting to see a little bit of clipping there. So there's a little bit of clipping the white cloud there, so I'm not too bothered about that. And we can do the same with the black slider, drag that to the left, so we're just getting a little bit of pure black in the deep shadows here. To see the effect that we've just gone and applied here, we can go to the cycles between before and after views. If we click on there, we can see that's the before and that's the after. If we do it again, it gives you a different view. Do it again, different view, do it again. Okay, so that's probably more appropriate for what we're doing here. So the before and after. And if we want to get back to the what we've just done, select the loop view again. So that's just running through the controls in the basic panel. You could of course select black and white, but that's best to be done in the HSL black and white panel. So just go back to color again. So that is how you adjust the basic panel.